He was born into a small town, a place where everyone knew each other and the streets were lined with old, warm houses. From the beginning, he was different from other children. Though he could not see the world with his eyes, he sensed it in ways others did not. Sounds, smells, and textures painted pictures in his mind that were as vivid as any painting. The soft rustle of leaves, the distant barking of a dog, the rhythmic patter of rain on the roof, all formed a world he could touch without touching it at all. His love for music began early. As a boy, he would sit for hours at the old piano his parents had brought home from a neighbor. Even without seeing the keys clearly, his fingers moved with an ease that amazed everyone around him. His mother often watched him play, a gentle smile on her face as his small hands created melodies that seemed to speak directly to the heart. Music was his language, his way of understanding the world and expressing feelings he could not describe with words. Life in his town was simple but full of warmth. Children played in the streets, neighbors greeted each other with familiarity, and the marketplace was a lively place where the smell of bread and spices mixed in the air. He loved these simple joys, even though he could not see them. He could hear the laughter, feel the vibrations of footsteps on the cobblestones, and smell the freshness of the morning air. These small details made him feel alive. Even as a child, he had a remarkable memory. He could remember the exact position of every key on the piano, every note he had ever played. His mind mapped the world in sounds. He knew when someone entered the house by the sound of their footsteps, recognized friends by the tone of their voices, and could sense changes in the weather long before anyone else. People often underestimated him because of his blindness, but those who knew him well understood that his perception was far richer than most. As he grew older, music became more than just a hobby. It was a part of who he was. The piano in his small home became his sanctuary. He would spend hours practicing, learning new pieces, and creating melodies that seemed to capture the beauty of the world he experienced in his own way. Sometimes, he would play at the town square during festivals, the notes carrying through the streets and touching the hearts of those who listened. People came from neighboring towns just to hear him play, drawn not only by his skill but by the way his music seemed to tell a story. Then the world began to change. Rumors of war reached his town, carried on the wind like a dark shadow. At first, it seemed distant, almost like a story from someone else's life. But slowly, the signs became clear. Soldiers marched through nearby villages, families whispered about neighbors who had gone away, and the sense of peace that had always filled his town began to crumble. Even though he could not see the changes, he could feel them in the tone of voices, the hurried movements of people, and the tense silence that sometimes filled the streets. Despite the growing fear, he continued to play. The piano became more than a sanctuary. It became a way to hold on to normalcy in a world that was slipping into chaos. Each note he played was a small act of resistance, a way to remind himself and others that life and beauty could still exist even in dark times. His music carried messages of hope, courage, and the enduring human spirit. He started noticing that people would listen more closely than before. They lingered by the windows when he played, their eyes wet with unshed tears, their hands clutching loved ones. In his melodies, they found comfort, a brief escape from the fear that had settled over their lives. Without realizing it, he had become a silent guide, a source of reassurance in a town that was learning to live with uncertainty. One evening, a group of neighbors gathered outside his home after he had finished playing. They spoke in hushed voices, concerned about the news of soldiers approaching the town. He listened carefully, sensing the urgency and fear in their tones. Though he could not see, he understood everything through the nuances of sound and the emotions behind words. It was then that he realized his music could do more than comfort. It could communicate, warn, and guide. He began experimenting quietly, playing small sequences of notes that carried specific meanings. A short, sharp melody could signal danger. A long, flowing tune could mean that it was safe to move. He tested it with those he trusted, and they began to respond, nodding or moving as directed by the music. It was a delicate system, one that required precision and trust, but it gave him a sense of purpose that went beyond survival. Life continued in this fragile rhythm. Days were filled with the sounds of the town preparing for the unknown, while nights were spent at the piano, crafting melodies that could carry messages or soothe the weary hearts of his neighbors. He became more aware of the nuances of sound than ever before, able to detect the faintest change in tone that indicated fear, hope, or resolve. The piano was no longer just an instrument. It was a lifeline. Despite the constant tension, he remained compassionate and attentive to those around him. He would teach children simple melodies, giving them a sense of normalcy and joy amidst the fear. He would sit with the elderly, playing tunes that reminded them of better times. In these moments, he was more than a blind man with a piano. He was a pillar of the community, a silent protector whose presence reassured others that they were not alone. He faced moments of doubt, too. There were times when the fear of the approaching war felt overwhelming, when he questioned whether his efforts could truly make a difference. But each time, the piano called him back, reminding him of the power of music to reach beyond sight, beyond fear, and into the hearts of others. It was a reminder that even in a world that seemed to be breaking apart, human connection and courage could persist. In these early days of the war, he also began to understand the importance of listening. Not just hearing, but truly listening to the sounds around him. He learned to interpret the distant march of soldiers, the quiet movements of neighbors seeking safety, and the subtle changes in the wind that hinted at approaching danger. His blindness, which many had seen as a limitation, became his strength. He perceived details that others missed, giving him an awareness that was both rare and vital. Music and perception became intertwined. Each note he played was informed by what he sensed in the world, and each melody carried not just sound but meaning. He became a bridge between the ordinary and the extraordinary, between fear and hope, between danger and safety. The piano, his lifelong companion, had become a tool of survival, communication, and courage. By the time the first threats of war truly reached the town, he was ready in a way that others were not. Though the world outside was changing in frightening ways, he had honed his skill and intuition, and he had begun to teach others to understand his musical language. It was a silent form of leadership, one that relied on trust, creativity, and empathy. Even in moments of solitude, he found strength. He would sit at the piano late into the night, letting his fingers dance across the keys, creating melodies that seemed to capture both sorrow and hope. These moments were not just practice but meditation, preparation, and reflection. Each melody carried the weight of his experiences, the lessons of his childhood, and the determination to face whatever challenges lay ahead. In a town gripped by fear and uncertainty, he became a quiet force of resilience. His music was not just sound. It was presence, reassurance, and communication. People began to rely on him, not just for entertainment, but for guidance, for hope, and for the reminder that even in the darkest times, the human spirit could find a voice. His life had already been shaped by loss and challenge, but he had turned those experiences into something extraordinary, a way to touch lives and make a difference in ways no one else could. As the days passed, the town learned to live with the tension of war, and he learned to live with the responsibility that had been quietly placed upon him. Each note he played, each melody he composed, became part of a larger story, one of courage, hope, and the enduring power of music. And though he could not see the faces of those around him, he could feel their presence, their gratitude, and their trust, and it gave him the strength to continue, no matter what the future held. The first signs of war arriving in his town were subtle at first. Soldiers appeared on the outskirts, distant shadows moving across the fields. People whispered warnings in hushed tones, and the once lively streets grew quieter as families began to prepare for uncertain days ahead. He could sense the change immediately, even without seeing it. The tension in voices, the hurried footsteps, and the uneven rhythm of life made it clear that nothing would be the same. Despite the fear that hung over the town, he continued to play the piano. The sound of music became a comfort to him and a signal to others that some parts of life could still be controlled. Children would gather near his window to listen, their faces alight with wonder, and neighbors would pause their anxious conversations to let the melodies soothe their minds. Music, which had always been his escape and expression, now carried a new weight. Each note seemed to hold a hidden strength, a reassurance that life could still carry hope even as the shadows of war spread. He noticed that some people began to move more cautiously, avoiding certain streets and changing their routines. It became clear that danger was approaching, and he knew he had to find a way to help those around him without being seen. Being blind made it impossible to rely on vision, but his heightened sense of hearing allowed him to perceive the subtle shifts in the town. Every creak of a door, every distant shout, every approaching footstep gave him information that others might overlook. He began to experiment with his music in new ways. Short sequences of notes became messages, a secret language that only those who listened carefully could understand. A rising scale might indicate that it was safe to move, while a staccato pattern warned of approaching danger. He tested these patterns with trusted neighbors, and soon they were responding instinctively, reading the messages in his melodies and acting accordingly. The piano became more than an instrument. It became a tool for survival. As the town adjusted to the growing threat, he realized that he had a responsibility to use his gift wisely. He spent long hours at the piano, practicing sequences that could communicate warnings quickly and clearly. Sometimes he would play a gentle tune to calm the fearful hearts of children, and other times he would strike the keys sharply to alert those who needed to hide or move quietly. The weight of this responsibility was heavy, but he felt a quiet determination to use his skills to protect the people he loved. One day, the town received news that soldiers were moving closer. Panic spread quickly, and people began to argue and worry openly. He could hear the tension and fear in every voice. Without hesitation, he sat at the piano and played a sequence that he had developed for just such an emergency. The melody rose and fell in a rhythm that those who had learned it recognized immediately. Families gathered quietly, children huddled close to parents, and people moved with a sense of purpose rather than panic. His music guided them, allowing them to act with coordination and calm. As the days passed, the situation grew more dangerous. Soldiers patrolled the streets, and rumors of raids spread quickly. Many people were afraid to leave their homes, and the once lively town seemed like a fragile shell of its former self. He understood that the safety of his neighbors depended on his ability to remain unnoticed while still providing guidance through his music. Each day required vigilance, creativity, and courage. He also began to notice the emotional impact of his music on the town. When he played, it was not just the message that mattered, but the feelings it evoked. A simple melody could lift spirits, inspire courage, or provide comfort in moments of despair. His music reminded people of life beyond fear, of a world where beauty and hope could still exist. In this way, he became more than a communicator. He became a symbol of resilience and determination. Despite his growing role, he faced constant challenges. There were times when the soldier's presence seemed overwhelming, when the fear of discovery threatened to paralyze him. He had to be careful not to play melodies too loudly or in patterns that could be recognized by those who did not understand their meaning. Every note required thought and precision, and every decision carried weight. The piano, once a source of personal joy, had become a delicate instrument of strategy and survival. He also had to navigate the human element of fear and uncertainty. Some neighbors were hesitant to trust the system he had developed, fearing it might draw attention. He spent hours explaining, demonstrating, and reassuring them. Patience became a crucial part of his daily routine, as did observation. By listening closely to how people responded, he learned which melodies were effective and which needed adjustment. The town was slowly learning to communicate in a silent musical code, and he was at the center of this quiet resistance. One evening, a particularly tense situation arose. Reports came of soldiers moving through nearby streets, and people feared that they would be discovered. He sat at the piano, feeling the weight of the responsibility pressing down on him. The melody he played was simple but urgent, each note carefully chosen to convey immediate danger while guiding people to safety. Families moved quietly through back alleys and hidden paths, their movements orchestrated by the rhythm of his hands. By the time the soldiers had passed, everyone was safe, and the town's faith in his guidance grew stronger. As the war continued, he began to expand his system. Different tunes could convey messages about where it was safe to gather, where food supplies were stored, or when it was necessary to remain hidden. Children learned to recognize specific patterns, and adults began to coordinate their movements with subtle cues from his music. In a world where verbal communication could be dangerous, the piano became a lifeline. It was a secret language that bound the community together, and he was its quiet conductor. He also faced moments of personal struggle. There were nights when he felt exhausted, overwhelmed by the constant pressure of keeping his neighbors safe. He would sit alone at the piano, letting the keys guide his thoughts and emotions, finding solace in the melodies he created. Music became a source of strength, a reminder that even in the darkest times, there was a way to make a difference. He drew courage from the trust people placed in him and from the knowledge that his talents could protect and inspire. Through all of this, he began to understand the deeper power of music. It was not just sound. It was a bridge between people, a way to communicate feelings and instructions without words. It was a way to maintain humanity when fear threatened to strip it away. His melodies carried hope, strategy, and reassurance, weaving the town's survival into a silent, continuous song. He realized that his gift had become a force larger than himself, a way to shape the world even without sight. The town slowly adapted to life under the shadow of war, guided by his piano and the messages it carried. People learned to move quietly, to listen closely, and to trust in the sequences of notes that guided them. Though danger was never far away, they found a rhythm in the chaos, a sense of order in the uncertainty. And at the center of this fragile balance was the blind man, whose hands moved over the keys with precision, courage, and creativity. Even in the most challenging moments, he never lost sight of the human connection that music provided. Each melody was not just a message but a reminder of shared humanity, of hope that life could endure. Children smiled when they recognized familiar tunes, elders found comfort in the notes that echoed memories of the past, and adults moved with confidence, knowing that the music guided them safely. In this way, his gift became a lifeline, a silent but powerful presence that helped the town survive the first wave of chaos. He also began to think beyond the immediate danger, considering how his music could help in the days to come. He experimented with more complex sequences, creating layers of melody that could convey multiple instructions simultaneously. This required incredible focus, but he was determined to improve, knowing that every refinement could save lives. His piano became both a tool and a teacher, guiding him as he guided others. By the end of the part of the war that he experienced so far, the town had begun to trust in the power of his music completely. What started as a personal expression had grown into a system of communication and protection. Though he could not see the faces of those he helped, he felt their presence in every movement, every response, and every moment of trust. His life, once simple and focused on personal passion, had become intertwined with the survival and resilience of an entire community. Even in moments of fear and uncertainty, he found strength in the piano. Each day, each melody, each sequence of notes reminded him that courage could take many forms, and that even in darkness, light could be found through sound. The war had changed the world around him, but it had also revealed his own strength, resourcefulness, and the extraordinary impact that one person could have, even without sight. Through his music, he became more than a blind man. He became a quiet protector, a guide, and a symbol of hope in a time when hope was most needed. The town had settled into a tense rhythm. Every day brought new challenges, and the blind man had become central to the way people navigated these dangers. The piano, once a source of personal joy and artistic expression, had transformed into a complex instrument of survival and communication. He had spent countless hours perfecting a system of musical codes, each melody carefully designed to convey precise instructions without alerting those who might misuse the information. At first, the system was simple. A few notes to signal safety, a sharp sequence to warn of approaching soldiers. But as time passed and the war drew nearer, he realized that more sophisticated communication was necessary. He began to layer melodies, combining rhythm, tempo, and pitch to carry multiple messages at once. A single tune could now warn of danger, indicate safe routes, and even direct people to supplies or places to hide. It was intricate, requiring him to remember each pattern and execute it flawlessly. But he was determined. The lives of those who trusted him depended on it. The blind man's ability to listen had always been remarkable, but the pressure of wartime forced him to refine it further. He learned to detect the slightest variations in sound, the clink of a dropped weapon, the whisper of wind through broken windows, or the distant footfalls of someone unfamiliar. Every sound carried information, and he interpreted each one with care. His blindness, which many had once seen as a limitation, had become an advantage, sharpening his perception in ways that were crucial to the town's survival. People around him had started to rely on the system instinctively. When he played a melody from his window, families would move with precision and calm. Neighbors would respond to signals with quiet gestures, coordinating actions that could otherwise have been dangerous if done blindly. Children learned to recognize simple sequences, while adults followed more complex patterns. Over time, his music became the invisible thread connecting the town, a language of sound that carried life-saving meaning. One day, the situation became especially dangerous. Soldiers had moved closer to the town, and rumors spread that they intended to search homes for resistance members and supplies. Fear gripped the streets, but the blind man remained calm. Sitting at the piano, he carefully played a sequence that conveyed multiple instructions. Families moved silently through hidden paths, avoiding streets where the soldiers patrolled. Neighbors signaled each other with subtle gestures, following the melody's guidance without a single word spoken. By the end of the day, everyone was safe, and his system had proven its worth once again. Despite these successes, he faced personal challenges. The mental strain of constantly monitoring the environment, remembering complex sequences, and ensuring that everyone understood the code was exhausting. Some nights, he would sit at the piano, letting his fingers drift over the keys aimlessly, trying to release the tension that had built within him. Music remained his anchor, a way to process both fear and hope. Even in the quiet moments, he felt the weight of responsibility, knowing that one mistake could have dire consequences. As the war pressed on, the blind man realized that his system could be improved. He began to create new patterns, subtle variations that could convey instructions more quickly and effectively. He experimented with tempo, using faster sequences to signal urgency and slower ones to provide reassurance. He introduced pauses and repetitions that allowed listeners to confirm their understanding. Each refinement made the code more reliable, and each successful test strengthened the trust between him and the people who relied on his music. There were moments of danger that tested his ingenuity. One afternoon, he heard soldiers approaching the street directly below his window. The usual melodies would have been too obvious, revealing their position and potentially endangering everyone. Thinking quickly, he played an improvised tune, using irregular rhythms and variations to communicate a complex message without revealing its intent to outsiders. The people who had learned his system understood immediately, moving safely through back alleys and hidden passages. The soldiers passed by, unaware that the town had been guided to safety through a silent, musical language. His role in the community grew, but he never sought recognition. The gratitude of his neighbors was evident in subtle ways. A nod, a quiet smile, or a whispered thank you when the danger had passed. He valued these gestures more than words because they reflected a shared understanding and trust. He knew that his strength lay not only in his ability to play music but in his careful observation, his creativity, and his deep sense of responsibility to those around him. The blind man also became a teacher, guiding others in understanding and using the musical code. Children learned simple signals, and adults practiced sequences that could be used in emergencies. Training others was slow work, requiring patience and repetition, but he understood its importance. By spreading knowledge of the system, he ensured that even if he were ever unable to play, the town would still have a way to communicate and protect itself. One night, after a particularly tense day, he sat at the piano and reflected on the power of music. He had discovered that it was not just a tool for communication but a source of emotional strength. His melodies carried courage, hope, and resilience. They reminded people that life could continue even in the darkest times, and that unity and trust could create a shield against fear. Music, he realized, could reach deeper than words, speaking directly to the hearts of those who listened. The complexities of war had forced him to see his piano in a new light. Each key, each note, each pause held significance far beyond sound. Music had become a living language, capable of conveying precise instructions and subtle emotions simultaneously. It was a bridge between the visible and invisible, between fear and safety, between despair and hope. Through his music, he had transformed from a blind man with a passion for the piano into a leader and protector whose influence extended far beyond himself. Despite the heavy responsibility, he never lost his sense of humanity. He still played melodies simply to bring joy, to comfort a child, or to recall memories of peaceful times. These small acts of beauty reminded him and others that life was not only about survival. Even amid chaos, there was room for compassion, creativity, and connection. His music became both a tool and a gift, a way to protect and to inspire. The town began to understand the value of his system in more ways than one. People who had been afraid to leave their homes now moved with confidence, knowing that the blind man's melodies guided them. Families shared food and resources more efficiently, using cues from his music to coordinate movements and avoid danger. Children played quietly, learning the rhythms that had saved lives, and the elderly found comfort in tunes that reminded them of better times. Music became the pulse of the town, a silent but vital thread keeping life moving. The blind man also faced moments of deep reflection. He often wondered how his life might have been different if he could see, if the war had not arrived, or if he had never discovered the power of music. But he quickly realized that these thoughts, while natural, were distractions from the work at hand. His focus returned to the piano, to the sequences and melodies that could make a real difference. He understood that his abilities, combined with his understanding of sound and human behavior, were uniquely suited to the challenges he faced. There was no room for doubt, only action and creativity. Through the growing complexity of his musical system, the town found stability amidst uncertainty. People learned to trust in the rhythms and melodies that guided them. Even when fear threatened to overwhelm, the piano's sound reassured them, offering clarity and direction. The blind man had become the unseen hand guiding lives, a quiet but powerful force whose influence was felt in every street, home, and alleyway. He also became increasingly aware of the emotional weight his music carried. It could instill calm, inspire courage, and create a sense of unity. Every note played was intentional, chosen not only for its functional meaning but for its impact on the human heart. Music had become a language of life and survival, capable of conveying hope where words might fail. He felt a profound connection to everyone who listened, as if each melody was a conversation between souls, transcending sight and fear. Even in the harshest moments of war, he found solace in this connection. The act of playing was both a responsibility and a blessing. His hands, trained and confident, danced across the keys with purpose. Each melody was crafted with care, carrying layers of meaning and emotion. And through this music, he could protect, guide, and comfort those who depended on him, ensuring that even in darkness, there was a way forward. As days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, the blind man's role continued to grow. The town had learned to rely on his piano as a tool, a guide, and a source of hope. The system of musical codes became more sophisticated, more precise, and more reliable. And through it all, he remained steadfast, using his gift to keep his neighbors safe, to inspire courage, and to remind everyone that even in the midst of war, the human spirit could endure and thrive through creativity, connection, and the simple yet profound power of music. The war had reached a point where fear and tension were almost constant. Soldiers patrolled the streets with increasing frequency, and rumors of raids spread like wildfire. The town, once quiet and familiar, now felt fragile, as if it could shatter at any moment. People whispered in corners, avoiding attention, while families moved cautiously, always aware that danger could appear unexpectedly. In this atmosphere, the blind man's role had grown heavier than ever. His piano was no longer just a tool. It had become a lifeline for everyone who depended on him. He had spent countless days refining his musical code, but now he faced challenges that were far greater than anything he had prepared for. Soldiers were not just nearby. They were moving through the town with purpose, searching for anyone suspected of resistance or hiding. He could hear the boots on the cobblestones, the low murmur of commands, the occasional sharp shout that sent a shiver through the air. Every sound demanded his attention, and he had to be ready to act quickly and decisively. One afternoon, news came that a group of soldiers had entered the nearby district, and they were inspecting homes. Panic rose immediately, and neighbors looked to him for guidance. Sitting at the piano, he played a carefully arranged melody, combining urgency with precision. Families moved quickly through alleys and side streets, guided by the notes he played. The melody was both a warning and a roadmap, conveying instructions without revealing their purpose to outsiders. By the time the soldiers left, everyone was safe, though the tension had left an indelible mark on the town's spirit. The blind man realized that the stakes were higher than ever. One misstep could mean disaster, not just for himself but for the entire community. He spent long hours thinking through every possibility, planning sequences of notes that could adapt to any situation. Each melody had to be clear, unmistakable, and capable of guiding multiple families simultaneously. It was exhausting work, both mentally and physically, but he understood the responsibility that rested on his shoulders. He also began to face the emotional weight of his role. The fear in the town was palpable, and people looked to him not just for guidance but for reassurance. He became keenly aware of how his music affected emotions. A wrong note could create panic, while a carefully crafted sequence could instill calm and focus. The piano was no longer simply an instrument. It was a conduit for hope, courage, and strategy. He had to balance precision with empathy, ensuring that every melody carried the right message and emotion. Despite his careful planning, danger sometimes approached unpredictably. One evening, he heard soldiers moving closer to his home, investigating the neighborhood in a way that felt more thorough than ever before. He quickly improvised a new sequence, using subtle variations in rhythm and tempo to communicate complex instructions without revealing their intent. Families moved quietly, hiding in cellars and behind walls, while others followed hidden pathways he had memorized. It was a tense, delicate operation, but his quick thinking and skill ensured that no one was harmed. The stress of these experiences weighed heavily on him. There were nights when he sat at the piano, exhausted and unsure if he could continue. The fear of failure loomed over him, yet he could not stop. He drew strength from the knowledge that his efforts were making a difference, that the people who trusted him had survived because of his guidance. Music had become both a responsibility and a source of courage, allowing him to face the overwhelming challenges of wartime life. He also worked to teach others how to respond to the musical signals. Adults learned more complex sequences, and children practiced simple patterns that could be recognized in emergencies. Training was careful and deliberate, as mistakes could have serious consequences. Yet, over time, the town became increasingly adept at following his guidance, relying on the piano as both a warning system and a tool for coordination. This sense of shared skill and understanding strengthened the community, fostering trust and unity despite the ever-present danger. There were moments of personal reflection, too. The blind man often thought about how life had changed so drastically, how his music had shifted from personal expression to a matter of survival. He considered the lives that depended on him and the trust they had placed in his abilities. This reflection was humbling, yet it also inspired determination. He realized that courage could take many forms, and that sometimes the quietest actions, the careful playing of notes, could have the greatest impact. During this period, a particularly dangerous situation arose. Soldiers had entered a part of the town where families had taken refuge, and panic threatened to spread. The blind man's quick thinking was crucial. He improvised a sequence that combined multiple messages into a single melody, guiding people to safety while keeping the soldiers unaware of their movements. It was a tense operation, with every note carrying life or death significance, but the town's residents followed his lead with precision. By the end of the day, everyone had avoided harm, reinforcing the town's reliance on his music. He also had to contend with the emotional strain of constant vigilance. Fear, anxiety, and uncertainty weighed heavily on him. There were moments when the weight of responsibility seemed almost unbearable, yet he found comfort in the piano, in the tactile sensation of the keys beneath his fingers, and in the sound of melodies that carried meaning and hope. Music remained a source of strength, allowing him to face the relentless challenges of the war with clarity and courage. The blind man's role became more than guidance. It became leadership. People began to look to him for decisions, advice, and strategy. His understanding of sound and human behavior allowed him to anticipate threats, coordinate movements, and maintain order in chaotic situations. His influence was quiet but profound, shaping the town's survival through careful, deliberate action and the careful orchestration of melodies that spoke louder than words. As the days passed, the war's impact grew more pronounced. Supplies became scarce, tensions ran high, and the constant threat of violence created a fragile atmosphere. The blind man continued to refine his musical system, creating variations that could adapt to new threats, coordinate multiple households, and respond to unexpected challenges. His dedication inspired confidence in the town, allowing them to navigate dangerous situations with a sense of security that might have otherwise been impossible. Despite the hardships, he never lost his compassion. He continued to play melodies to comfort children, to calm the fearful, and to remind everyone that life had beauty even in dark times. His music carried more than instructions. It carried humanity, empathy, and resilience. In moments when fear threatened to dominate, his melodies offered reassurance and courage, connecting the community through sound and shared understanding. Even in the face of constant danger, he remained creative and resourceful. Each challenge became an opportunity to test his system, to find new ways to use music for communication and protection. He refined his sequences, introduced new patterns, and developed strategies that accounted for both practical and emotional needs. His dedication, intelligence, and sensitivity transformed the piano into a living tool that supported life, hope, and survival. Through it all, the town grew stronger. People learned to trust not only his guidance but their own ability to interpret and respond to the musical signals. Children practiced sequences that saved time and confusion. Adults coordinated resources and movements, and the community moved with a quiet confidence born of trust, discipline, and shared understanding. Music became a lifeline, binding the town together even in moments of great danger. The blind man also realized the personal growth he had achieved. He had faced fear, danger, and uncertainty, and had discovered strengths within himself that he might never have known otherwise. His awareness, creativity, and empathy had grown sharper, and his connection to the people around him had deepened. Music had allowed him to communicate, lead, and inspire in ways that transcended his blindness, showing that courage could manifest in quiet, unexpected forms. By the end of this period of the war, the town had come to rely on his presence and his piano more than ever. The system of musical communication had become deeply integrated into daily life, providing safety, coordination, and reassurance. The blind man, once simply a musician, had become a central figure in the survival of his community, using his talents to guide, protect, and inspire. Even as danger remained ever present, he continued to play, to teach, and to refine his system. His music carried hope, courage, and strategy, demonstrating that even in the darkest times, human creativity and resilience could prevail. Through sound, empathy, and determination, he had created a network of protection, a bridge between fear and safety, and a reminder that even one person could make an extraordinary difference in the lives of many. The war eventually began to shift, and although danger was still present, the intensity lessened as people adapted and found ways to survive. The blind man continued to play, his melodies now deeply embedded in the rhythm of the town. The piano had become not just a tool for survival but a symbol of resilience and hope. Each note carried lessons learned from months of careful observation, quick thinking, and tireless effort. People in the town had grown remarkably skilled at interpreting his music. They moved with a quiet confidence, responding to sequences with precision that could have seemed impossible at the beginning of the war. Families who had once been paralyzed by fear now navigated the streets safely, coordinated through sound rather than sight. Children could recognize urgent messages and respond appropriately. Adults could make decisions based on subtle cues, and the elderly found reassurance in melodies that reminded them of safer, calmer times. His influence had become woven into every aspect of daily life. The blind man also noticed changes within himself. The challenges he had faced had strengthened his senses, sharpened his perception, and deepened his empathy. He understood people in ways that went beyond sight, anticipating needs, emotions, and fears before they were expressed. Music had allowed him to communicate with precision and emotion, creating bonds of trust that went far beyond the ordinary. He realized that courage was not always loud or visible. Sometimes, it moved quietly through the air in the form of sound and understanding. One day, news arrived that the soldiers who had threatened the town were retreating, drawn away to other conflicts. Relief swept through the streets, yet the blind man knew that vigilance was still necessary. Months of danger had taught the community to be cautious, and they continued to rely on his music for guidance. But now there was a new sense of possibility, a chance to rebuild, to heal, and to reflect on what they had endured. The piano remained central, not just as a tool for survival, but as a bridge to a future where life could regain its normal rhythms. The town began to celebrate small victories, and the blind man's music became part of those celebrations. People gathered to hear him play, not out of necessity but for joy. The melodies reminded them of endurance, of courage, and of the community's ability to stand together despite the harshest circumstances. Children laughed and danced to the tunes, elders clapped and hummed along, and adults allowed themselves a rare moment of release from fear. Through his music, he helped the town reclaim a sense of life and hope that had been threatened by war. He also took time to reflect on the personal journey that had brought him to this point. Once, he had been simply a man who loved music, a blind individual navigating a world of sound. Now he was a leader, a protector, and a source of inspiration. He recognized that his blindness, which some had once seen as a limitation, had allowed him to perceive the world in unique ways, to listen deeply, and to act decisively. His life had become intertwined with the lives of those around him, bound together by the power of music and trust. Even as the war receded, the blind man remained committed to the piano and the community. He continued to refine melodies, teach sequences, and play for both communication and joy. Music had proven its extraordinary versatility, serving as a lifeline, a warning system, a teacher, and a comfort. It had carried courage and hope through the darkest times and now carried a sense of continuity, a reminder that life could endure and flourish even after immense hardship. One afternoon, he organized a gathering of the townspeople in the square. They listened intently as he played a melody that he had composed to celebrate resilience and unity. The tune flowed through the streets, reaching every home, every hidden corner, and every heart. People responded with quiet gestures and smiles, recognizing the symbolic message of togetherness. It was not just music. It was a testament to human strength, creativity, and connection. Through sound alone, he conveyed gratitude, courage, and the hope of a new beginning. He also took time to mentor the younger generation. Children who had grown up during the war, now familiar with his musical code, learned to understand both its practical applications and its emotional depth. He taught them how to use sound for communication, how to listen carefully, and how to interpret subtle cues. But he also taught them to play for joy, for expression, and for connection. Music was no longer just a means of survival. It was a way to grow, to connect, and to celebrate life. Through these efforts, he observed the town's gradual healing. Streets that had been tense and fearful slowly became places of cautious laughter, conversation, and shared work. Families rebuilt their homes, children played freely, and neighbors helped each other in ways that reflected the unity forged through hardship. His music had been central to this process, not only providing practical guidance but also nurturing the emotional bonds that sustained the community. Even as peace returned, the blind man never forgot the lessons of the war. He remembered the moments of fear, the improvisations that had saved lives, and the quiet resilience that had carried the town through the darkest days. Each memory was a note in the larger melody of his life, a reminder of both human vulnerability and extraordinary strength. He understood that courage, empathy, and creativity could persist even when the world seemed broken, and he carried these lessons forward in every melody he played. His influence extended beyond the town. Travelers who passed through would hear the piano and pause, sensing something remarkable in the sound. Stories of a blind man who had used music to guide a town through war began to spread quietly, inspiring others. His role, though quiet and unobtrusive, became legendary in its own way, a testament to the power of creativity, perception, and human connection. Through his music, he had created a legacy that transcended the immediate challenges of war. As years passed, the piano remained central to his life. He played daily, weaving new melodies that reflected both personal expression and communal experience. Music had become a companion, a guide, and a teacher. It carried lessons of courage, hope, and resilience, and it continued to connect him to those around him. Even long after the threat of war had faded, the melodies lingered in the streets, in homes, and in hearts, a lasting echo of endurance and humanity. He often reflected on the unique journey that life had taken him on. Once, he had been a man defined by his love of music and his blindness. Now, he was a symbol of perseverance, a quiet leader, and a testament to the extraordinary power of human creativity and empathy. The piano had given him a voice, and through it, he had communicated, protected, and inspired countless lives. His story was not just one of survival but of the enduring ability of music to unite, guide, and uplift. One evening, as the sun set over the town, he played a long, flowing melody that carried memories of both hardship and hope. Families paused in their routines to listen, children stopped their games, and elders leaned back, eyes closed, absorbing the familiar sounds. The music spoke of shared struggle, resilience, and the possibility of a better future. Through the simple act of playing, he reminded everyone that life could continue with dignity, joy, and courage. He continued to mentor, to play, and to inspire, knowing that the lessons of the past would guide future generations. Music had been both a tool and a teacher, a bridge between fear and hope, darkness and light. It had allowed him to communicate when words were impossible, to guide when danger loomed, and to comfort when despair threatened. His melodies had become a living testament to human strength, creativity, and connection. As the town fully embraced the return of peace, the blind man's role evolved once more. He played not to warn or guide but to celebrate life itself. Streets once filled with fear echoed with music that carried laughter, conversation, and joy. Children danced, families gathered, and neighbors shared stories and memories. His piano had helped shape not only survival but the rebirth of community, weaving continuity, hope, and humanity into every note. Looking back on the years of war and fear, he understood that his life had been extraordinary. His blindness had not been a limitation but a lens through which he perceived the world in ways others could not. Music had become a language, a tool, and a companion, allowing him to touch lives, protect others, and create bonds that transcended the ordinary. His story was a reminder that even in the darkest times, courage, creativity, and empathy could shine brightly through the simplest acts. In the end, the blind man continued to play, each melody a reflection of life, survival, and hope. He had become part of the town's heartbeat, a quiet force whose influence endured long after the war. Through music, he had communicated when words failed, guided when danger threatened, and inspired when despair loomed. His legacy was not written in records or trophies, but in the lives he had touched, the trust he had earned, and the enduring sound of melodies that spoke of courage, love, and the human spirit. Through the piano, he had shown that even in darkness, one person could light the way for many.